Canaanite sacred symbols. That is, how did they describe and define and think about sacred things? This is an interesting phenomenon because these guys are talked about a lot in the Bible, and the Bible has nothing good to say about the Canaanites, right? They hate them. Their religion's false, it's evil, etc., etc. And we are from archaeology and from the Ugarit text, we can see what the Canaanites thought about themselves, which of course is that we're good guys. The stupid Israelites are evil. You know what I'm saying? So everybody interprets the other people in different ways. The oldest religious archaeology we have comes from Jericho, which is one of the oldest cities in the world. It was built right by an oasis out in this desert here near the Jordan River, and so was a place where agriculture could flourish. They built a town, and this is more or less what the town looks like today. And we're looking at a spot right here where they've had a massive tower and tombs and shrines built. Now notice, archaeologically, this level here is 7000 BC. This level here is about 1000 BC. So there is 5,000 years of, I guess 6,000 years of strata here. Does that make sense to people? And basically the city was there, and when a building falls over, they build on top of it, and it just builds layer and layer and layer. So all of this is an artificial mound, and they've dug through this. You can see the strata, you can see the layers in here, right? And basically the archaeologists dig through this and try to find things. But what they found at the lowest level was this tower. And this tower is a very strange thing because it seems to be partly a military tower. That is, you could fight from it. But it has a hole. It doesn't have a room inside. The stairway is from the inside of the wall, but it seems to be also a tower on which they would offer sacrifice and prayer. And then it has a chamber inside where they found some skulls, which we'll talk about in just a second. So this is one of the earliest shrines we've got from the ancient Near East, and it's a temple tower of some sort. Remember, Nephi prays on a tower. It seems to be that type of thing. That is, it's a raised tower that was probably used for several purposes, but you'd also pray there. Here's a different perspective on this tower. And again, you can see clearly the strata here, right? I mean, you can see lines across this. And then down here you've got the hole where there's a chamber inside this tower. Now, inside that were plastered skulls. You can see here the actual bone, right? This is a skull. But when the king died, or the high priest, or whoever it was died, they took the skull and they covered it with, once it had desiccated and decayed, so that only bones were left, they took these skulls and they plastered over them the faces of the people. And you can see here they put eyes in, some type of, white stone or shell or something as eyes. Part of this plaster's fallen off, clearly, but they had plastered this skull, and then this chamber had several of these skulls in them. And they think they're what's called an oracular skull, which means the skull is used for necromancy. Or oracle, is a prophecy of some sort. Oracular means having to do with making an oracle. And what they would do is summon the spirits of the dead person whose skull that was, and get a prophecy or get a revelation from them of some sort. It's called necromancy, which means divination through the dead. Is there any examples of that in the Bible? Did anybody do necromancy? Who? Saul and the witch of Endor. Remember, Saul is king. Samuel was his prophet, always had guided him. Samuel dies. Saul is all upset. He wants to know what he's supposed to do. Some big crisis is coming. And so he goes to a woman that's called the witch of Endor. Endor means the spring, or the spring of Dor, just this place. So there's this witch there, and witch is how it's translated, but it would be better to translate it necromancer. What does she do? She raises the spirit of Samuel up from the dead. And actually Saul doesn't see it. Only the woman sees it. And she says, this is what Saul is saying to you. And what does Saul say? Because you've gone to the Canaanites and worshiped their gods, and you have called me up through the Canaanite witchcraft, you're going to lose your throne, you're going to be overthrown, you're going to be killed. So he curses Saul for doing this, because they're not supposed to go to these necromancers. But this is the type of thing that probably was going on here. There's another site called Ein Gedi, which this dark blue is Jerusalem. This is where Ein Gedi is. It's down on the coast of the Dead Sea. This is about 4000 BC. And it is a temple from Neolithic times that is up on the sides of the cliffs by a big spring. This spring had a big grove around it. They built a temple by it. So you can see right at the base of the temple is this spring just coming out of the rocks. This is kind of viewed as miraculous water because it just pops out of the rock, right? This is the site where it is. You can see there's a little bit of life down here, but that's all modern water brought in. Up on the top here you can see some trees, and that's where the spring is, and the temple's right up on top of this. So it's about a third of the way up the cliffs. Up here is the level of Jerusalem, and so we're at the bottom of the Dead Sea. This is 1,000 feet or whatever below sea level. This Ein Gedi is this spring. That means the spring of the antelope. And you can see some trees from the water that pops out and flows down through here. Now, here's the Dead Sea, and you can see that's the Dead Sea Basin. And you hike up this trail, and there's the spring. It's right at the base. There's this massive, beautiful rock outcrop. At the base of that's a spring that pops out. You got trees and plants and water around that spring. Then you follow the trail up, and there's where the temple was, right up there. It's just foundation stones now, but you can see the edge of it there. This is what it looks like today, and it was a big operation. Probably these were stone foundations with mud brick walls that have crumbled away since then. Here's the pathway that goes in. This is you can see little benches where people could sit, but this was the gateway coming in. And all temples had monumental gates, and there's a plaza. So you pass, this is the temenos wall, surrounds it. You pass through the gate, you come into the plaza, and then the Holy of Holies is over here. Now here's a big altar place where probably they made sacrifice in the temple itself. Okay. And this is a close-up of the altar. Rough-hewn stones. This one's in a circular form. Sometimes they're circular, sometimes they're squared. It just depends on the time and place and so forth. This is the inside of the temple. Basically what you've got is a bunch of a stone bench. You've got the walls. You would add brick and wood roof on top of this. You've got a stone bench here that circles the whole thing. On these would have been offerings to the gods. People could come and sit and pray here. And then this is the central shrine or the high place where they have a raised platform on which are these stones, on which was probably at some point an image of some sort, like an image of Baal or an idol or something like that. We're probably resting on these stones here. But that would be the central shrine where the image of the god was kept, and the people would come pray in here. So this is a holy of holies, or a holy place in this ancient Canaanite temple. Here you can see more clearly this structure here, right? It's a raised platform on which probably the image of the god was standing there. Now, they didn't find anything in here, but they did find a cave near here where there was a huge cache of bronze offerings. And they think that in a period of crisis or threat, they took all the bronze and the treasure from the temple and they buried it in this cave, and then the temple was destroyed and they never came back, and it was left there, and the archaeologists have found it. Here's me having climbed up there. I happened to choose the day to go up there was the hottest day in Israeli history in 100 years. It was about 120 when I hiked up that mountain. So the rangers actually met me and told me, you have to go back down. I tell them, forget you. If I die, I die. That's not your problem. But I didn't die. Here's the spring. It's much lower now than it was originally because all the water is being pumped out of the aquifer by the Israelis for agriculture. And so the aquifer has very little water in it anymore. So the springs are really, really low. But at one time, this would have been gushing, a big, big spring. These are some of the treasures they found. These are mace heads. They think they put sticks in here and use them to bash people on the head with as weapons. Here's some of the other treasure that was found. Like I said, it's found in a cave a few miles away from the temple. Most scholars think this was the offerings and the treasure that was in the temple. See a big basin here where they'd cook meat of a sacrifice or something like that. Here are scepters of some sort. These are probably antelope heads. These guys are right on the edge of agriculture, so it's partly hunting, partly agriculture. The next site we're going to look at is Gezer, which is right here. Again, the dark blue dot is Jerusalem. This is about 1800 BC, and it is a set of aligned stones, like Stonehenge, well, vaguely like Stonehenge. We talked about raising stones and aligning stones as phenomenon of creating sacred space. And this is one particular example of that. What you've got here, obviously the ground level was up here at one point. What the archaeologists actually found was a little rock sticking out, right, above the ground. Most of these had fallen over, but a couple were still standing. And they dug it out to wonder what was there, and they found this structure here. Now these stones are all original, and they were formed this giant line, and each, there's these giant stones and smaller stones. And what scholars think, based on comparative archaeology with other Canaanite sites, is that each of these stones is for a different god, because these guys are polytheists, they have multiple gods, so they raise a stone for each god. And these are giant matzevah, these are giant standing raised stones, okay? And you can see they're in an alignment with an altar sitting there in front of them where they could make offerings. Does that make sense? So this is an open air shrine of raised stones, which was simply, how you would create a open air temple. These are different angles of the same thing, so you got to kind of get a sense of it. Now notice, there's a bunch of rocks here. These are not original. These are put in here by neo-pagans who come and worship here. It's kind of interesting that neo-pagan movements are modern people who are resurrecting the old pagan religions and trying to worship the old gods. So they're called neo means new. So neo-pagan, new pagan movements. And, they'll sometimes call them Wicca and different things. They have different names for them. But as a general rule, they're called neo-pagans. And what they tend to do is go back to the old pagan shrines and worship there. And so some modern Israelis are doing this. And we know that because they're lining up stones to mark the sacred space. And I'll show you a second where they created a shrine around this altar and did offerings there. These are neo-pagans. So they sneak into the site and worship there. Here's the altar. Now all these stones are white. They're painted white. That's because Israelis come in and paint graffiti on them, and then the archaeologists come and paint them white again, and this is a cycle of graffiti making. I've got some pictures of from a different time when the graffiti's still there. I'll show you in a second. So notice they create these piles of stones. They stand these stones. They have this altar stone here where maybe you'd build a fire in there, or maybe pour oil or wine or something in as an offering to the gods. So that this is an offering stone. You can see a little bit of the graffiti under there. So these are just different perspectives on it. You see what these things are like. So this was an ancient Canaanite shrine about 4,000 years ago, each stone representing a different god. Now here's pictures from an earlier time. You can see people have piled up stones there. They are not there in this picture, right? There's nothing out here in this picture. Here they've created a little shrine there. And then you can see the Israeli graffiti. This is all Hebrew here. So what you've got here then is neo-pagans coming in, and I've seen this lots of different places. I was in Ireland last May and saw half a dozen neo-pagan shrines that they'd set up in these old Irish ruins. At any rate, you can see then the continued veneration or the reinvention of the veneration of pagan gods from there. Now all of this, of course, this is what the mound looks like really. This is all dug out by the archaeologists. You could see the height of the land would have been much higher originally before they dug it out. And then while I was visiting there, a Bedouin wandered by with his herd and just, wandered through his sheep or wandered through the shrine. Here's Tel Kasile, which is right down here. This is an interesting spot because it is a temple of the Philistines. The most famous temple of the Philistines is at Gaza, where Samson, pushed the pillars and knocked the temple down. Right? Remember that story? Now we tend to think of this in a highly glorified way, based on movies and stuff. This massive temple or something. This is an actual surviving, one of the best preserved Phoenician or Philistine temples, which will allow us to see exactly how the Solomon story works, or the Samson story. So here's the shrine. it's got these walls around it. There's an outer court here and an inner building here with an inner this would be the holy place, the Holy of Holies back here, with a doorway on which were 2 pillars. So, I mean, this is a small thing. This is only 20, 30 feet big, right? And the image of the god, in this case, I think it was Dagon, was the god they're talking about, one of the Philistine gods, would have been standing here in some way, all right? And so it's a small place, and Samson would have stood between these 2 pillars, on which were either brick or wooden pillars. These are the pillar foundations, and on top of these would have been pillars, and that's what he would have had to push over, something like that. And the roof was resting on these, so when you push those over, the roof collapses and down it goes. Does that make sense? So the story in its actual archaeological context can be understood quite clearly from this particular temple. But notice, this temple has a holy place, just like Solomon's temple, a Holy of Holies. The image of the god would have been kept there. This is the same thing from a different angle. These are fairly close together here. These are the same benches we saw at the En-Gedi temple. These are raised platforms that kind of surround the walls, and people would leave offerings on these. They'd votive offerings, food, flowers, anything they wanted to offer to the gods. They'd rest them on these benches. This is the altar of that temple. It's out. You can see the wall here. It's a ruined pile of rubble here, but that was the original altar where they would offer the sacrifice. So notice, the sacrifice altar is always outside in a courtyard in the open air. Why? Because you don't want big fires burning inside your temple to burn the place down, number one. Number two, the smoke from the burning sacrifices would fill the temple, and it'd be a big, huge mess, right? Have you ever been in a room where there's lots of big fire and smoke's burning? It's a mess. You can't deal with it. So you have to offer the big altars with burning fires on them have to be outside.